to Spectator TV. I'm your host, online editor Alexandra Marshall. As we draw to the end of this year, I have started to wonder about what has been achieved by the political class. Too much or too little? Certainly, Albanese's swift and brutal march against freedom has progressed at an alarming rate, helped in no small measure by the opposition, who seem to be acting under the delusion that confining public speech to a preemptive prison cell is the same as keeping people safe. It will be a long time, I fear, before a Dutton leadership understands that true safety comes from the liberty of Western enlightenment. Albanese, on the other hand, will never learn this. I also wonder how those who voted for the Labor Party on the promise of an energy bill bribe feel as New South Wales faces self-imposed restrictions on air conditioners coming up to the height of summer over the Christmas period. Meanwhile, South Australia, hailed as the green renewable energy superpower, is having very serious discussions about using diesel generators to keep the lights on as the reliability of the grid disintegrates. Yes, one of the most resource-rich nations on Earth, a nation that Climate Change and Energy Minister Chris Bowen likes to refer to as a renewable energy superpower, is set to drag around portable diesel engines to power a capital city. If we're going to kill off our coal-fired power plants, we have to switch something reliable on. Everyone knows that the only answer is nuclear power. The whole world knows it, and I'm sure they told Chris Bowen the same thing at the COP conference. Either we accept our fate as a nation of rolling blackouts and sweltering summers spent looking at the aircon rather than enjoying it, or we get off our asses and start building proper energy infrastructure instead of fanning about with the windmills, the batteries and the solar panels. The Labor Party is never going to do this. Having been kicked out of power in Queensland, they are still posting Simpsons memes like this one and getting themselves community noted in the process. In this case, the notes are particularly hilarious, so I'll read them out. One says, "The Simpsons screenshot is digitally altered and misleading. Cooling towers at a nuclear power plant, including the plant operated by Mr. C. Montgomery Burns, emit water vapour. Water vapour is not green." A real screenshot of The Simpsons would not make this obvious error. Ouch. And this is from the political party that obsesses about misinformation and disinformation. Is Labor guilty of pushing the three-eyed fish memes into the energy debate with the express purpose of misleading the public? Yeah, of course they are. They tell us, the peasants, that we'll be in trouble if we criticise their policies in a way that might cause harm, while they do whatever they like. I'm pretty sure the Australian public are getting tired of their elitism, hypocrisy and toddler-level debates. Just stop it. My message to the Labor Party at the end of the year? Grow up. The Australian public would much prefer Chris Bowen to start answering real questions. Questions like, how much is the true cost of renewable energy if Australia has to rebuild all these green things every 20 years until the end of time? Who did the math on these resources? What happens to heavy industry, our national security, our energy bills? Who is going to build these wind turbines and solar panels if we end up in a military conflict with China? Does the Labor Party have any backup plans to keep the lights on? Or is their backup plan to lose the next election and leave a mess for the mostly hopeless Liberal Party to sort out? Australia deserves so much better than this. And as far as I can tell, the only progress made is by the public on social media, where they had 2 victories this week. The first was in relation to the Australian Venue Co, the giant company that runs over 200 pubs and clubs. They came out all hot and heavy doing the usual woke thing by saying they weren't going to celebrate Australia Day because it might hurt a few feelings. Less than 24 hours later, after a huge boycott list was circulated online, they came out with a half-hearted apology, pretending that they didn't realise this would cause offence. I went to their website and had a little bit of a look around, And don't you know it, they've got an extensive DEI plan. This stuff is pretty bad. The website begins with an all people's welcome. This states that the company promotes a culture of diversity, equity and inclusion through programs like the AVC Pride and a First Nations Committee for Reconciliation. They also have a Safe Spaces initiative for respectful environments at their venues. The message comes with 3 flags: a rainbow flag, a trans flag and an Aboriginal flag. Can you guess which flag is missing? Oh yes, the most inclusive flag of them all. The Australian flag, the flag that represents the entire nation, its proud history, and all the people who live within it. Maybe they should add that flag to the front page or explain why the national flag isn't worthy of being mentioned on their welcome page. And just for fun, I'll read you the reconciliation statements. Quote, "Our reconciliation initiative is driven by our newly formed First Nations Committee, who are working together to deliver initiatives based on respect, education, celebration and reconciliation." Did the original decision to skip Australia Day originate from the initiative? We can't know, of course, but we can wonder if it was discussed. And then we have the Safe Spaces program, which is designed to ensure that the venues are inclusive spaces. I'm sorry, are Australian venues in general not already safe and inclusive for customers? The beautiful country, this country, whose flag does not appear on these pledges, is the reason Australian pubs and clubs are safe, not random diversity programs and messages on websites. The diversity program, which is advertised as including pride, reconciliation and women's empowerment, the pride part of this bit says it includes gender and sexuality inclusion, training hosted by -18, it celebrates the Wear It Purple Day and the annual Big Gay Day. So many days. It makes you wonder why Australia Day didn't make the original cut. This is pretty typical of big woke companies, but the public response is getting more forceful. People really are tired of having their wonderful nation ripped down and trodden under the feet of activism. It is not inclusive. It is not diverse, and it certainly is not tolerant. DEI is an ideology that should die, and maybe, just maybe, with the election of Donald Trump, it might actually happen. And finally, the other victory for the public came as the protest against the Commonwealth Bank, who, a few days ago, announced a $3 change to fee to withdraw cash over the counter. Something that is happening more and more, given the rate at which the ATMs are being closed by the big 4 banks. It's all part of the soft, non-legislated push to get rid of cash without having to admit to doing so. If the ATMs are closed and there are added fees for cash, banks can manipulate an increasingly poor populace into a digital-only economy. Well, this morning the Commonwealth Bank announced that it had paused its plans to add the $3 fee, saying, and I quote, "We feel that we didn't get the communication right on this, and we want to take a more individual approach." No doubt they'll wait a few months and then sneak it in, but it does show that the public voice on social media has power, and that, if we are not very careful, we will lose that power in search of safety. So, to conservatives out there, I say this: be careful. The only way to be truly safe is to be free. We are joined now by Saxson Davidson, a research fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs. Saxson, I don't know about you, but I've been worn down by this year of politics. It hasn't exactly been a pro-freedom or pro-prosperity year, so I thought we might have a bit of a chat about some of the eye-watering government spending that's been going on. So Saxson, $129 billion a year. Is the government's addiction to spending beyond its means driving inflation?
Well, all reasonable people have been able to see that the current levels of excessive government spending is absolutely driving inflation. The RBA admitted as such. The only people that seem to be blind to the facts seem to be the government itself. As you stated, governments across the nation spent $129 billion more in the 2024 financial year than they did in the 2023 financial year. And government spending accounted for 55% of total economic growth, which is simply an unacceptable level, particularly when you compare that to the amount of economic growth driven by private enterprise, which is just a measly 6%. And simply, the only way you're going to lift living standards across the board for mainstream Australians is to have private investment, which drives innovation, drives capital growth, and increases wages naturally instead of artificially, which is what we've been seeing in this government.
Yeah, I think there's actually a really great research note put out here by Kevin Yu. I mean, I've got one here, and he's got some great facts here that I just want to read one of them out. Since the Albanese government was elected, 55% of total economic growth has been attributed to increased government spending, which is what you've just pointed out. This is higher than during any other government on record, including the Hawke-Keating years, which seems to be extraordinary. I mean, I remember the Keating years as a child. It was devastating. Do you think that Australian politicians need to go back to the idea that prosperity comes from allowing the private sector to hire people, to make money and to grow, rather than these handout culture that we seem to have going on?
You're absolutely correct. The political class need a realignment of values to realise what actually drives growth in our nation. We currently have a record amount of red tape. The amount of regulators that are going to be, the amount of bureaucrats who are going to be directly regulating a private enterprise is going to reach 100,000 public servants by the end of this financial year. And you simply cannot run a company efficiently and effectively if you've got this many people from the government at all levels, but particularly the federal government at the moment, barking down, giving you forms, wasting your time, which costs money. It costs extra money through wages because your employees have to spend time. It's lost money through the lost output because you could have been spending that time better selling your product or selling your service. And ultimately, it's also an unknown cost to the amount of businesses that never get started or never reach their full potential due to this bountiful level of red tape.
Well, I don't know about you or what it's like down there, but in New South Wales, when you're walking around looking for Christmas shopping, if you have any spare change left this year, there are a lot of for lease signs, there are a lot of empty stores, even in the Westfield centres. That's going to get worse now with the collapse of a very large women's fashion retailer. I mean, this is not looking like it did when I was a kid, where there was, even though we were on hard times, we still had some kind of noise of private business going on. Now, this report that the IPA put out would sort of prefer that government cut their spending and maybe, start paying off the debt. But my question is that possible? Because Albanese has invited the Greens into a sort of soft coalition, and now all these industries and activists, they want their piece of the public money pie. So it feels as if Albanese might be spending to keep the Labor Party in power.
Well, the government is certainly spending to sort of paper over the cracks of their failed economic plan. The Albanese government's entire economic plan has revolved around increasing government spending and fueling out of control and unplanned for mass migration. And the result of this is that people at the individual level, at the per capita level, have been going backwards. The new ABS national accounts data was released today. We have now gone through 7 quarters of sustained per capita decline. We are now in a per capita recession for a prolonged period of time now. And of the 9 fully gone quarters under the Albanese government, 8 has resulted in decline in economic growth at the per capita level. Mainstream Australians at the individual level are simply going backwards. And although this mass migration and the level of government spending may be growing the economic pie, the individual slice that each Australian gets, new arrivals and people already here alike, is getting increasingly and increasingly smaller.
Well, it's extraordinary because a few years ago, Australians couldn't go anywhere and there was nothing to buy because they were all locked down with COVID, which was another excessive spending era. And now they can go out, but everything's closed. All the small businesses who did all the travel and tourist industry have been absolutely crushed by the COVID era, and we're finding out that the true economic fallout of that spending in COVID is still happening. People are still closing up shop, and the rising interest rates are killing off the rest. But look, I know we're talking about economics, but I did see that you posted an article rightly calling out the New South Wales government for asking people to turn off their air conditioners. Now, another writer at the Spectator Australia asked if we were going the same way as Pakistan, with diesel generators propping up the grid. Is this evidence that the energy revolution that Bowen loves to go on about is failing the people of Australia?
It's 100% failing the people of Australia. We simply cannot call ourselves a developed nation if you're asking people to put down their facilities at home in order to keep the power on. It is a pure failure at the hands and at the feet of the net zero zealots in our government, particularly Chris Bowen and particularly Anthony Albanese and particularly Tanya Plibersek. The continued demonisation of our industries to provide our baseload sources of power, and the outright banning of another source of baseload power, that being nuclear, is always going to result in an issue like this, where blackouts occur and where people have to choose essentially whether to heat or eat. It's simply unacceptable and proves plainly the failure of net zero. And now we will always have the zealots who will always decry that actually this is the fault of the coal plants. But the removal of baseload sources means that the margin of error in our power grid is exceptionally high. And obviously this cannot be blamed on the removed baseload power sources. It simply just means that the renewable sources that they love to support cannot be a backup to failure in the energy grid.
Well, they can't blame nuclear, they can't blame coal and gas because these blackouts weren't happening before. I mean, everyone understands that there's a giant storm and a line goes down. It's like, okay, well, fair enough, that's an act of God. But things like, oh, it's hot today, so we don't have enough power, so please don't turn on your aircon, as you say, completely defeats the purpose of living in a first world country. I mean, the idea that a resource-rich country like Australia would have to load share is embarrassing. I mean, Premier Chris Minns, he should be embarrassed about this. He should be on his hands and knees asking us for forgiveness that we have to prop up his power grid. Now, what is the point of this whole thing? I mean, we've got nuclear. As you say, it's sitting there. Has the IPA seen any indication this situation will be fixed and that maybe we might actually get nuclear, or are we really relying on a coalition government for that?
Well, it was promising that Peter Dutton at an IPA event himself announced the coalition's nuclear policy. But unfortunately, given the ban, I believe that there will need to be bipartisan support in order to generate any sort of domestic nuclear industry. And really, the Albanese government and the Labor Party in general have to sort of go away from this almost religious opposition to nuclear energy. If we are going to go down this emissions reduction path, this net zero path, it is simply impossible without nuclear energy. And so far, there is no indication that they will retrace their steps and approve nuclear power. So we are really at the hands and feet of Peter Dutton to sort of get this nuclear industry off the ground if he were to become Prime Minister. But without that, then I'm very fearful for our energy future.
Well, I'm going to take out some shares in a candle making company because I think the new dark ages is coming. That's not financial advice. It's just something I'm considering doing. Look, Saxson, just as we come to the end of the year, this is probably going to be one of our last conversations because, you know, all the Christmas decorations are up. It's starting to feel a bit festive. Do you have any thoughts about the last sitting day of Parliament when a huge pile of unread, rushed and controversial legislation was pushed through? Does this bode well for Australia in 2025?
I don't believe so, particularly when you look at the social media ban. The social media ban won't come into effect until 2026, which means that there was this big rush to get this quite unfinished and widely unread bill where 15,000 people submitted to the inquiry, but only 100 were read before the report was completed. And, you know, why is there this big rush to put through this bill before Christmas, when it won't even be implemented before next year's Christmas? And if that's the sort of quality of behaviour that we are seeing in our parliament at the moment and from our government, it really begs the question about the other bills that were also guillotined through. It actually represented a big backsliding in our democracy and in our parliamentary processes. And I'm very unhappy with how the last day in Parliament sort of acted out.
Yeah, that and the poor behaviour generally of some of the other senators, which Australians were just watching being like, we pay a fortune for this? What is going on? It's so depressing that this is the state of our politics, but it is what it is. I'd like to thank the IPA for its continued support of freedom. You guys have done a wonderful job this year. How can people support or join the IPA?
You can become one of our 9,500 members at ipa.org.au. We currently have a Christmas appeal, so you can donate to that before Christmas, obviously. We love our members. They're great supporters of Australian freedom, Australian democracy and economic prosperity. And thank you for the plug as well.
No, that's okay. Thank you for writing, for researching, and for the events that I encourage people to go for that you guys host. Thank you so much, Saxson, and have a wonderful Christmas and New Year.
Merry Christmas. Thank you for having me.
We welcome back to the show political commentator Mark Powell. Mark, I'm going to ask you all about the extraordinary pardon issue to the president's son in a moment. But first, you were our resident expert on Joe Rogan podcasts during the election. Unlike our ABC chair, Kim Williams, you have actually listened to these podcasts. What do you think of the comments that accuse Mr. Rogan of preying on people's vulnerabilities, fear and anxiety while making fantasy and conspiracy outcomes a normal part of the social narrative? That's Kim Williams, of course. Are these informed and balanced views of Joe Rogan's work?
Yeah, doesn't it go to show just how out of touch the ABC is? Unlike Mr. Williams, I am one of the 3 billion people on Earth that have watched Joe Rogan and appreciate what he does. And look, this is what Elon Musk is talking about, where it's the death now of legacy media and the triumph of citizen journalism. And again, I think this is actually a space, can I just say, where the Spectator has been for quite some time in giving people like myself and many others the opportunity to speak truth into the public square, because anybody that's been interviewed by the media just knows how biased they are. And that's what's particularly galling, I think, about the ABC. Their charter is that they are supposed to be balanced. They're supposed to represent everybody's opinion and be neutral, but they're not. They're not journalists. They're activists. And I just think it's quite frankly embarrassing that the head of the ABC would A, say that he's never watched Joe Rogan, but B, then go on to pontificate about all the ways that he's misleading the public, which is just crazy, because Joe Rogan is one of the leading, I think, voices in the world today, which just gives people a platform for free speech. And for the ABC to think that they've got nothing to learn from that just shows how out of touch they are.
Well, also, anyone who has been on legacy media, shall we say, understands that it lives on this clickbait cycle. So they can decry social media all they like, but they are actually behaving worse than social media, where they chase things that they think will get them eyeballs, and they condense interviews down to 2 or 3 minutes at most, which gives you no content, no idea what a story really is. And that is something that Joe Rogan has been pushing against with his 3-hour-long podcasts. Now, the ABC chair also picks fault with the great crime that Mr. Rogan's work is entertaining. Perhaps I've missed something, but where did the ABC get this idea from that the news has to bore us to tears, Mark?
Well, exactly. And you could flip that around too, Alexandra, and say, wait a minute, wasn't the ABC supposed to also entertain us? Their numbers are plummeting, right? And so the fact that they can't see that they can learn anything about this, I think, along with many others, the Joe Rogan interview with Elon Musk, JD Vance and Donald Trump, I think they actually had a massive impact on the election. And even now, many of the Democrats in America are saying, yeah, Kamala Harris should have gone on the Joe Rogan podcast. And it was a massive mistake that they didn't. But to go back to your original point, here's the thing is, Joe Rogan lets people speak. Joe Rogan is like Elon Musk. Joe Rogan was basically a centre leftist, or even a far leftist. He used to support Bernie Sanders. Joe Rogan just wants to allow people uncensored for 3 hours just the opportunity to say what they really believe. The legacy media doesn't do that. It's highly scripted, highly edited, and we see some classic clangers in that regard. But that's the beauty, and this is what Williams misses about Rogan. Rogan is giving people, both sides of Parliament as well, both sides of the political spectrum, the opportunity to say what they really think. And ironically, this is the great irony of all, the ABC doesn't. And it's in their charter. It's what they're supposed to do. They could learn from Rogan.
Yeah, we should probably take the $1 billion we give to the ABC and give it to Joe Rogan. But surely there's a discussion, or at least the ABC chair should have been interested in the idea that allowing a future leader of the free world to talk for 3 hours is obviously going to break down any propaganda, because you can't maintain propaganda for that long. Eventually it will break down. It's like those guys who interview university students and ask them questions, and after they've given off their original thing, they're done. You can tell. That seems to be a better way of informing the public about the nature of a person than these gotcha questions that we see from the political interviews and the debate. I mean, you watched both. Which did you find more informative?
Oh, exactly. You put your finger right on the central issue, Alexandra. People just want to, it's like they want to sit down at a coffee shop and they want to be able to just sit in on a conversation, particularly with the leader of the free world. I mean, would actually Trump or Vance or let alone Musk come onto the ABC and be interviewed? I don't think so. But the point is people actually just want to hear what people think. And if you give people the space, if you give people the opportunity to do that, people will sit there for 3 hours. That's what's the game changer here. I sat down, and because I found it so interesting, I sat down and watched the whole interview twice. So that was like 6 hours of my life I need to get back. But I was taking notes as I was going because it was just so informative. And it was paradigm shifting, not just in terms of content, but I thought, wow, here's a real moment where media in the world is shifting. And you know, it's like the ABC is still driving a horse and cart and Rogan is driving Ferraris.
I'm laughing because I actually made the same joke in my article about this, and then I deleted it because I didn't have space. But that is actually what it feels like watching. What's being missed here is Joe Rogan's skill, because he is a skilled interviewer. And when I think the last time that Elon Musk was interviewed by a leftist, he ended up interviewing the interviewer, and he really turned it around. Like, you can't go into an interview with someone like Elon Musk, who's incredibly smart, and do it in a half-assed fashion, because you will get your career is over if you do that. And something makes me wonder if the ABC maybe isn't even able or capable of having these types of interviews with these people. But look, my favourite line from Mr. Williams is this, and I'm going to read it because I think it's actually quite funny to listen to him explain the problem with himself in his own words. He said that basically the public are complaining that I have a warped outlook on the world, that I am an embarrassment to our nation, that I am in some way unhinged, that I am a supreme example of arrogance and disconnection with Australian society. Those are his words, not mine. So in a follow-up interview, he described the Joe Rogan podcast as a threat to the ABC. Surely, Mark, $1 billion a year company that lives off the public purse, has no inclination to do anything in the free market, they couldn't be threatened by someone like Joe Rogan, surely.
Well, I actually think he's right on both counts. I think that's a pretty accurate assessment, I think, of himself. He's out of touch. In fact, as I was thinking, it's not just the comparison between a horse and cart and a Ferrari. It's now a horse and cart and actually a rocket ship to Mars. This is now the game changer in the media. But let's be honest, this is a threat to the ABC. If the ABC wasn't getting $1.3 billion in taxpayer funding from the Australian people, it wouldn't last. People are just not interested. But here is the thing that does scare me is I've got, friends and relatives, and because it's still free, that's the only media they actually imbibe, and it's propaganda, and it's just sensible people. They're just persuaded by whatever group think that's coming out of the ABC and being pumped at them daily. But this is a threat. Make no mistake, he's right. Joe Rogan, and it's not just Joe Rogan, it's many others. They are a threat to the ABC because people are turning off the ABC. And Mr. Williams, if you're listening to this, they are turning off and they're listening to others. And you, as the head of the ABC, should be asking yourself why.
I think that National Press Club meeting is the first time people have watched the ABC in many years, and only because Joe Rogan reposted it. But let's talk about Hunter Biden and that pardon. When Joe Biden was trying to get himself re-elected, and indeed when the Democrats were trying to use Biden to elect Kamala Harris, he was asked repeatedly about the possibility of pardoning his disgraced son, Hunter Biden. Here's a clip.
Let me ask you, will you accept the jury's outcome, their verdict, no matter what it is?
Yes.
And have you ruled out a pardon for your son?
Yes.
You have.
I'm extremely proud of my son, Hunter. He has overcome an addiction. He's one of the brightest, most decent men I know. And I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
Mr. President, you plan on appealing your son's sentence?
Now, in the final days of both the presidency and Biden's career, he has issued the pardon. Did Joe Biden lie?
Oh, of course he did. I mean, there's no doubt about that. 10 times his press secretary was asked repeatedly, but 10 times by those in the press over in America in the White House, and unequivocally she said no. No, he's not going to do this. How much clearer can I be? No. But here's the real problem. If this is a disgrace, Alexandra, I mean, not only has he lied to the American people, but he's now trying to gaslight them into trying to say, well, this was all a political witch hunt against his son. It was not. That's what he's been doing to Trump. He's weaponized the justice system. And the whole Democratic campaign, this is what's so galling about it, is they kept holding Joe Biden up as this is the man that's upholding the rule of law. And indeed, he even had the audacity to say when he made this announcement on X, no one is above the law. Well, clearly you are. Clearly your son is. And let's face it too, this is not just some presidential pardon of just a one-off thing like Watergate, as bad as that was. This is over an 11-year period.
Well, let me ask you about that, because as you say, it's not a regular pardon for stated crimes, which has been customary for presidents to hand out, rightly or wrongly. This is an all-you-can-eat buffet pardon that protects Hunter Biden from a wide range of unspecified potential crimes against the United States for more than a decade. Now, as others have pointed out, this covers the notorious China and Ukraine years. Do you think this is going to pour fuel on speculation that dodgy things happened during that part of his career?
Oh, 100%. I mean, Miranda Devine, she wrote the great book, The Laptop from Hell, which, again, the media suppressed before the last election. This is exactly what Miranda Devine was saying was the evidence on the laptop. And many Americans are saying it's not just that he's been pardoned of the crimes that he was currently being charged and, convicted for, later to be convicted for. It's what was on the laptop. That needed to be investigated. Of course, this fuels the speculation. I actually think this might come back to bite Biden. Now, I'm no legal expert, but I'm actually seeing some lawyers say now that Hunter Biden has been pardoned, if people were to prosecute him and to call him as a witness regarding the contents of the laptop, and he had to testify under oath, he could no longer plead the Fifth Amendment because he's already been exonerated of any crimes. So nothing can implicate him, and he would have to tell the truth. Wouldn't that be fascinating?
Well, the one person who doesn't have a pardon is Joe Biden. I mean, his defense could be, I'm old, but that's about it. But they were calling.
It wouldn't stop his son Hunter from having to testify.
No,
That's
that is the speculation online. You are correct. But they are calling it the broadest pardon since Ford pardoned Nixon, which protected him from the Watergate scandal. I mean, in that case, it was reported that Ford justified his action, and I'm going to quote Wikipedia here, by carrying in his wallet a portion of text from the Burdick versus the United States, when in 1915, a Supreme Court case included the dictum that a pardon carries an imputation of guilt and that its acceptance carries a confession of guilt. Now, historians say that this pardon contributed to Ford losing the election in 1976. Mark, pardons have increasingly become political, with modern presidents often using them to excuse their friends of crimes, and not just a few, like heaps and heaps of people, and both sides do it. Is this muddying the water between justice and political elitism?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Everybody sees it. Everybody knows it. Joe Biden and his cronies try to get around it by saying, but think of his son. You know, he's a drug addict. This is not about protecting Hunter Biden. This is about protecting Joe Biden and what the connections were with the Ukraine and the laptop and everything that can involve. And this is what's so galling to the American people is it's like Donald Trump's called this out. There's like a two-tier justice system. So, you know, if you're a January 6th protester, they're still in jail, right? If you protest outside an abortion rally, or an abortion clinic, they're in jail, some of those protesters. And yet here is Hunter Biden clearly has committed felonies, right, and he's being pardoned. It is a disgrace.
Well, I think the problem is that Joe Biden lied. I mean, he should have just said, yeah, I'm going to pardon my son, instead of pretending for the election that he wasn't. But look, Joe Biden has justified his decision by accusing others of a political witch hunt against his son. Now, even if that was true, which seems unlikely given Top Hill commentators have scoffed at the comments, that doesn't explain the pardon of unspecified potential crimes. Now, as you say, we've talked about Ukraine and China, but as far as the Democrats go going forward, they have built their new revelation of a party on justice and transparency. Do you think this is going to haunt them at the next election?
Absolutely. It should haunt them till the end of time because they predicated their whole campaign. They were the ones upholding the rule of law. Look at the contrast they kept saying on CNN and all of the legacy media in America between Biden and Trump. Democracy's on the ballot. Well, the American people now say, yep, or they can see clearly democracy was on the ballot. But it wasn't as the Democrats were saying. What a monumental case of gaslighting this all is. But thankfully, because of X, because of the media now and the internet never forgets, thankfully the American people and so many people around the world are waking up and they're seeing the hypocrisy of the Democratic Party for what it was. And let's face it, America dodged a bullet in this election. They got a reprieve from the whole woke nonsense. And I'm just excited for what's ahead. I think strap yourself in because Trump doesn't even have to be inaugurated. And he's already negotiating deals with Canada. He's got Justin Trudeau on the rope saying, hey, you either come to the party here or the tariffs are just going to destroy you and you can become a 51st state of America.
Look, Mark, terrorists are being kicked out from across the across some of the Islamic regimes because everyone's going, uh-oh, Trump's in power. We better get rid of these random terrorists we've got sitting in our palace and mansion here. They've got to get lost. It's actually funny how he can have so much power without even holding power. It shows you how weak Joe Biden was because none of this happened when he actually held the presidency. Look, I've got to ask you a sneaky last question here because you did listen to the Elon Musk interview with Joe Rogan, and we've just had this disastrous stuff getting pushed through our parliament in the last sitting week with no negotiation, no discussion, no nothing, and it's going to fundamentally change the digital world, not just for kids, but for every adult in Australia, where we are going to speak at the permission of our political parties, and that is extraordinary. You know, Elon Musk is going to become a very powerful person very soon, and he will be protected by the US president. So if our safety commissioner says, hey, I want you to do this, he's going to be like, no. And what is Australia going to do? I asked a few politicians and they haven't even discussed this outcome. What do you see happening with Elon Musk? Do you think he is going to continue to force the issue of digital freedom and Australia will have to accept it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm really glad to hear that you're asking politicians about this, and because you're ahead of the curve on this. I think I'm increasingly realising what a game changer it was that Musk, and he's the only person on earth that could do it, bought X. How incredible is that? That itself, I mean, Rogan pointed this out in his interview with Elon Musk. That itself has preserved free speech, and let's face it, that's the foundation of democracy in the West, and not just in America but throughout the world. It's quite incredible. It's going to be very, very interesting. I mean, already Trump is showing leadership with all the nations around him, including Mexico. You know, all of a sudden the border's not an issue because, you know, Mexico's pulling its weight. And in a similar way, I think in this dream team sort of scenario, it's like the Avengers assembled. You know, it's like, it's just incredible. He's got this dream team of people that he's bringing together. Musk being, I think, one of the most important, the richest guy in the world, you know, who's built the car industry and is doing these amazing things with space travel. Now he's going to be looking at government efficiency. Wow. I mean, Australia's just small fry. We're small fish compared to America. I just hope that a lot of our politicians can take note and take courage and see that there is such an appetite amongst the population for conviction and conviction politicians and politicians that have just got ideals. People will get behind you. You've just got to endure all the hate that will come your way, ironically, from the lefties.
Yeah, I've said it before, I will say it again. I'm going to say it as we finish our show tonight. Elon Musk paid $44 billion to protect free speech for everybody in the world. It was a bargain. We should be thanking Elon Musk that he used his own money to do that because our politicians were too chicken shit to do it for us. And that is crazy. But look, thank you so much for joining us here today, Mark. It was a pleasure. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We will see you next year.
Yeah, have a great Christmas. Always nice to chat with you.
And that is all we have time for tonight. You can catch us tomorrow with Marshall Live. Thank you and have a lovely evening.